25 men, 1 woman, 24 hours. In the heart of ancient Rome, inside a dimly lit brothel cell in the city's most dangerous district, an impossible competition was taking place. The empress of the most powerful empire on earth had just challenged Rome's most legendary prostitute to see who could satisfy more men before dawn. Money wasn't the prize. Status wasn't the reward. This was pure, raw competition, and what the empress did that night would seal her fate forever. Her name was Valeria Messalina. She ruled beside her husband by day and worked as a prostitute by night. And when she finally went too far, her execution would be so swift that historians still argue whether the stories about her were even humanly possible, or if they were the most devastating character assassination ever written. What you are about to hear will make you question everything you thought you knew about power, sex, and ancient Rome. Before we uncover what really happened behind palace walls, make sure you're subscribed because what's coming will completely change how you see ancient Rome. Hit that like button if you've ever wondered how much of ancient history is propaganda versus truth. Comment below which part of this story shocks you most. We'll be revealing details that even historians find almost impossible to believe. What you're about to hear comes from multiple ancient sources. Tacitus, Suetonius, Juvenal, and Pliny the Elder, all writing within decades of these events when eyewitnesses were still alive. Modern forensic historians have spent centuries trying to separate fact from political propaganda. The truth they've uncovered is somehow both less extreme and more fascinating than the legend suggests. The year is 38 CE, and Rome stands at the center of the known world. The marble temples gleam white under the Mediterranean sun. But in the shadowed corridors of the imperial palace, something darker is taking shape. The Emperor Caligula's reign has descended into madness. Executions happen daily. Paranoia infects every conversation, and survival requires making yourself seem harmless, irrelevant, invisible. In one of the palace's less prestigious wings lives Claudius, the emperor's uncle. He's 47 years old, and everything about him screams weakness. He stutters when nervous, drags one leg when he walks. Saliva sometimes escapes his mouth when he speaks. For decades, his own family has treated him as an embarrassment, keeping him away from public view, assuming he's too simple-minded for politics. This assumption will save his life. Across the city, in a mansion befitting Rome's ancient aristocracy, lives 15-year-old Valeria Messalina. She descends from Augustus's sister, making her blood as blue as it gets in Rome. Ancient sources describe her as beautiful. Dark hair, pale skin, features that conform perfectly to Roman ideals. But what strikes people most about her isn't beauty, it's intensity. When she looks at you, you feel examined, evaluated, judged. She's intelligent, ambitious, and about to have her entire future decided without anyone asking her opinion. Roman marriages among the elite aren't about love. They're about alliances, bloodlines, political advantage. When Caligula decides to marry Messalina to his embarrassing uncle Claudius, nobody imagines it matters much. Claudius will never be emperor. This marriage just keeps Messalina close to the palace, produces children with imperial blood, and solves a minor political problem. The girl herself has no say in the matter. One day she's told she'll marry a man 3 decades older than her, a man she finds physically unappealing. And that's that. Her wedding night at 15 years old to a drooling, stuttering man in his late 40s must have been traumatic in ways ancient sources never acknowledged because Roman culture didn't recognize female consent as particularly important. Then just 3 years later, everything changes. Caligula is assassinated by his own guards in 41 CE. Chaos erupts. Who will be emperor? As soldiers search the palace, they find Claudius hiding behind a curtain, trembling. Almost as a joke, they proclaim him emperor. Suddenly, impossibly, the man everyone dismissed as an idiot rules the greatest empire in history. And Valeria Messalina, barely 18 years old, becomes Empress of Rome. Little did anyone know that this teenage empress would become the most notorious woman in Roman history. Her name forever associated with sexual excess so extreme that 2,000 years later we're still talking about it. Imagine yourself in Messalina's position. You're 18. Your husband is emperor, but he's also nearly 50, physically unappealing and by all accounts not particularly interested in sex. You have unlimited wealth, command over thousands of servants, and access to anything Rome can offer. You've already produced 2 children, securing your position. What do you do with absolute power and complete boredom? According to ancient sources, Messalina began slipping out of the palace at night. She would wear a blonde wig to disguise her dark hair, dress in ordinary clothes, and disappear into Rome's streets, accompanied by just one trusted attendant. Palace guards noticed, but said nothing. What could they say? She was the empress. Confronting her could mean execution. Where was she going? To the Suburra, Rome's notorious red light district, where prostitutes worked in tiny cells and sailors from across the empire came seeking pleasure. Tacitus and Suetonius both report that Messalina worked in a brothel under the name La Cisca, which means she-wolf. Shaped the brothel owner for the privilege of using a room. She serviced clients who had no idea they were sleeping with the Empress of Rome. The psychological complexity of this behavior is staggering. This wasn't forced prostitution. She was paying to do it. This wasn't financial desperation. She commanded the wealth of an empire. According to sources, she sometimes charged normal prostitute rates. Other times worked for free. The motivation wasn't money. It was something else entirely. If you're shocked by what you're hearing, hit that like button, because the contest with 25 men is coming. And it's somehow even more unbelievable than what we've covered so far. Back at the palace, Messalina played the role of dignified empress perfectly during daylight hours. She attended state functions beside Claudius. She received foreign dignitaries with appropriate gravitas. She managed imperial household affairs efficiently. Nobody watching her at official events would suspect that hours later she'd be in the Suburra serving anonymous clients in a prostitute cell. But Messalina wasn't content with anonymous encounters. Ancient sources describe increasingly elaborate palace parties that crossed every line of Roman propriety. She began hosting what can only be described as orgies, gatherings where senators and their wives performed sexual acts in front of each other, often at Messalina's explicit instruction. These weren't entirely voluntary. When the empress invites you to a party, refusing could be interpreted as disrespect, potentially treason. Guests arrived nervous and left compromised, bound to Messalina through mutual guilt and shame. The guest lists read like a directory of Rome's power structure. Senators seeking favor, generals needing military appointments, merchants wanting lucrative contracts. Once they participated in Messalina's parties, she owned them. They couldn't oppose her without risking exposure of their own behavior. It was blackmail through hedonism, and it was remarkably effective politically. Claudius somehow remained oblivious, or perhaps chose to remain ignorant. His freedmen advisors, former slaves who had risen to positions of enormous power, watched Messalina carefully, gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment. Narcissus and Pallas, the two most powerful men after Claudius himself, understood that Messalina threatened the empire's stability. But moving against an empress required perfect timing and unquestionable proof. The preparations for disaster were being made on all sides, though nobody realized it yet. Then came the competition that would make Messalina legendary for 2 millennia. Pliny the Elder, writing in his natural history just decades after Messalina's death, describes it matter-of-factly. Messalina challenged Scylla, Rome's most famous prostitute, to see who could satisfy more men in 24 hours. Picture the scene. 2 women, one an empress in disguise, one a professional courtesan, engaging in what might be history's most bizarre contest. According to Pliny and sources that quote him, both women worked through an entire day and night. The specific numbers vary slightly across sources. Some say 25 men, others claim the count went higher. But the consistent claim is that Messalina won easily, still seeking more partners when Scylla admitted defeat. The sheer physical logistics are almost unbelievable. 25 men in 24 hours means a new partner every hour with no breaks for food, sleep, or recovery. From a medical standpoint, this would cause severe tissue damage and exhaustion. Did it really happen exactly this way? Many modern historians are skeptical, but the story appears in multiple independent ancient sources, which suggests at minimum that Romans believe their empress had done something extraordinarily scandalous involving sexual excess and public competition with prostitutes. What drives someone to this? Modern psychology might diagnose hypersexuality disorder, a condition where sexual thoughts become intrusive and compulsive, where behavior escalates despite negative consequences, where normal satisfaction becomes impossible to achieve. The pattern matches what sources describe about Messalina. constantly seeking more, never satisfied, behavior escalating over time, unable to stop despite obvious dangers. Roman medicine had no framework for understanding psychological conditions. They attributed excessive female sexual desire to hysteria supposedly caused by the womb wandering through the body. A Roman doctor examining Messalina would have prescribed herbs or dietary changes, completely missing any underlying psychological issues. She was trapped in patterns of behavior she might not have understood or been able to control in a culture with no treatment and no sympathy. Back at the palace, Messalina's behavior was becoming impossible to hide. Too many people knew. Rumors spread through Rome's streets. Common people gossiped about seeing the empress in the Suburra. Senators who attended her parties whispered to each other. The scandal was becoming public knowledge, except apparently to Claudius himself, still isolated in his bubble of imperial information control. Narcissus and Pallas watched and waited, building their case. Messalina had made enemies with every execution she ordered, every political rival she destroyed, every person she humiliated. They were all waiting for their chance at revenge. The storm was gathering, and Messalina seemed utterly unaware of the disaster approaching. And then impossibly she made everything worse. In the year 48 CE, Messalina fell in love, not with her husband, not with anonymous brothel clients, but with Guacilius, by all accounts the most handsome man in Rome. He was a senator, wealthy, charming, and politically ambitious. Their affair wasn't particularly secret, but what happened next defies rational explanation. While Claudius was away at the port of Ostia overseeing grain shipments, Messalina married Silas in a public ceremony. Read that again. She married another man while still married to the emperor. This wasn't a secret tryst. This was a full traditional Roman wedding with witnesses, signed contracts, bridal attire, religious rituals, and hundreds of guests. Tacitus describes it as a celebration complete with music and feasting held in Messalina's gardens with senators and aristocrats in attendance. What was she thinking? The sources suggest two possibilities. Either she had completely lost touch with reality after years of escalating behavior, or she was attempting a coup, planning to make Silas the new emperor by replacing Claudius. Either explanation requires understanding that Messalina had reached a point where normal risk assessment no longer functioned. Imagine being a guest at that wedding. You receive an invitation to the empress's marriage ceremony to someone who isn't the emperor. Do you attend? Refusing insults the empress and risks her legendary vindictiveness. Attending makes you a witness to what could be considered treason. Either choice could mean death. Many chose to attend, perhaps hoping Messalina's coup would succeed, and they'd be rewarded for their loyalty, or perhaps simply too terrified to refuse. The celebration continued for hours. Music played, wine flowed, the bride and groom performed traditional rituals, including mock religious ceremonies. Some sources claim they consummated the marriage publicly or at least theatrically. This wasn't subtle political maneuvering. This was either madness or an incredibly bold power play. Then word reached Claudius at Ostia. His freedmen brought him reports that seemed impossible. Your wife has married another man in a public ceremony attended by half the Senate. Claudius initially refused to believe it. They had to bring multiple witnesses and show him signed marriage documents before he accepted that this was really happening. Narcissus understood instantly that this was the moment. Messalina had finally given them unquestionable justification for her removal. He essentially staged a counter-coup to save Claudius from Messalina's coup, taking control of the Praetorian Guard and marching back toward Rome with troops. At the palace, Messalina continued celebrating, apparently unaware or uncaring that her world was ending. The celebration stopped abruptly when messengers finally reached Messalina with news. Claudius was returning with the Praetorian Guard, and he knew everything. Reality crashed down. The wine haze lifted. She sobered instantly, understanding with perfect clarity what this meant. Execution for herself, for Silius, for everyone connected to the wedding. In desperation, she tried one final manipulation. Gathering her children, Britannicus and Octavia, she set out to meet Claudius before he entered Rome, hoping the sight of his wife and children would melt his anger. It was the same kind of emotional manipulation that had worked for years. But Narcissus intercepted her. He warned Claudius that seeing Messalina would destroy his resolve, that her beauty and tears would undo his justified fury. He physically prevented the meeting from happening. Silius faced execution first. He didn't resist or beg, only requesting a swift death. He received it, beheading the same day. Guests from the wedding were hunted down systematically. Some were executed outright. Others were given the option of suicide, which in Rome meant killing yourself before soldiers did it for you. The purge swept through Rome's elite, erasing everyone connected Messalina's final act of defiance. Messalina withdrew to the gardens of Lullus, an estate she had stolen years earlier through accusations and executions. Ironically, it would become her tomb. With her was her mother, Lepida, largely absent throughout Messalina's life but present now at the end. Ancient sources describe the young empress's mental state as wildly unstable, shifting between rage and despair, panic and eerie calm. She tried to write a plea to Claudius but couldn't find words. She considered suicide but couldn't summon the courage. Fear paralyzed her even with death approaching. How do you process falling from absolute power to condemned prisoner in a single day? After 7 years of living exactly as she pleased, of bending Rome to her will, she now sat in a garden with nowhere left to run. Narcissus didn't risk leaving her fate to Claudius's mercy. He knew that if the emperor saw her, if she wept and reminded him of their past, she might survive. So he sent a tribune and centurion with strict orders. "Kill her immediately!" They found Messalina with her mother, a dagger trembling in her hand. The tribune waited, giving her the chance to take her own life and die with some dignity. She couldn't. Even facing certain death, courage failed her. Lepida urged her daughter to end it herself rather than be executed like a common criminal. But Messalina hesitated, frozen between pride and terror. Finally, the tribune lost patience. He stepped forward and struck her down with his sword. Messalina died at 22 years old in the garden she had stolen, killed by the same imperial machinery she had once commanded. Lepida stayed behind, performing one final act of maternal love, arranging her daughter's body, closing her eyes, restoring what little dignity death allowed. Then she disappeared from history entirely. Claudius was dining when messengers brought news of Messalina's death. According to Suetonius, he showed no emotion. He didn't ask how she died. He expressed neither grief nor satisfaction. He simply continued eating, then called for more wine as if nothing particularly significant had occurred. 2,000 years later, historians still debate what actually happened. The sources all have clear biases. Tacitus, writing 50 years after these events, was a moralist who used Messalina as a cautionary tale about female depravity and imperial corruption. Juvenal was a sadist whose job was exaggeration, not accuracy. Suetonius loved scandalous gossip. Regardless of verification, Pliny was repeating stories he'd heard rather than documenting events he witnessed. Modern forensic historians have tried to separate propaganda from truth. The consensus is that Messalina likely did engage in scandalous sexual behavior. The general pattern is probably real because it led directly to her execution. But the specific details, working in a brothel, the 25-man competition, the exact nature of palace orgies, might be exaggerated or invented entirely. Why would sources exaggerate? Because after Messalina's death, Claudius married Agrena the Younger, Nero's mother, who had her own agenda for controlling historical narratives. Making Messalina look as terrible as possible made Agrena look better by comparison. Most surviving sources were written during or after Nero's reign, when Agrena's faction controlled what got recorded and what got buried. Feminist historians have asked uncomfortable questions about why Messalina's sexual behavior became so legendary when male emperors did comparable or worse things with less historical condemnation. Caligula allegedly committed incest and rape. Nero would later force senators to watch him rape their wives. Tiberius supposedly maintained a villa where he molested children. Yet Messalina's reputation as sexually depraved exceeds all these men. Why? Because female sexual agency terrified Romans more than male sexual violence. A man exercising power through sex was normal, even admirable in Roman culture. A woman actively pursuing sexual pleasure for herself, controlling male bodies, choosing her own partners. This violated every Roman assumption about proper gender roles. Messalina had to be destroyed, not just politically, but historically turned into a cautionary tale that would frighten women away from sexual autonomy for centuries. What does Messalina's story teach us? At its core, this is about how female sexuality has been policed, punished, and weaponized throughout history. When men abuse power sexually, it reinforces male dominance. When women claim sexual agency, it challenges the entire gender hierarchy. Roman sources couldn't tolerate that challenge, so they created a monster whose story would echo for millennia. But there's something else here too. The question of truth versus propaganda. How much of what we know about history is actually just the version written by the winners? If this makes you rethink the past, like and subscribe for more tales where legend meets lies and the shocking reality in